the center situation, and it was from Garrett Ford. He wrote, other than TJ Johnson, who I believe we signed to a 2-year deal after this season, after this season, do you see us re-signing Bodine or drafting a new center? Basically, what do you see happening at center? Well, obviously that's tough to predict because we're going to need to see what Bodine does this year on the field. TJ Johnson just seems like a swing backup guy to me. Otherwise, he probably would have, and or fill-in guy for injury, which I believe he's done in limited spots in his career, but he hasn't been able to crack the starting lineup. He just doesn't seem to be NFL starting caliber, at least in the eyes of the Bengals coaching staff. Your thoughts on this question, Scott?
I think if Marvin Lewis is back one more year, and therefore Paul Alexander is back one more year, I think the answer is Russell Bodine's our starting center. I think they re-sign him, bring him back. He's the answer. And then either TJ Johnson or JJ Dielman will be the backup. If they move on from Marvin Lewis, stranger things have happened. If they move on from him, I think, and they bring in now that's assuming they don't promote someone like Paul Alexander to be head coach. If they bring in someone from outside, kind of do a clean sweep, then I could see the team taking a very fresh approach, saying, okay, who do we have signed under contract? We have TJ Johnson and JJ Dielman. We'll check them out, see if there's anything there. If not, then we look at drafting a guy because because the offensive line possibly could be a big weakness. I mean, if we lose all the coaches and they do a restart, it's probably because the offensive line struggled horribly and we lost a bunch of games despite having all these great weapons. And if that happens, the offensive line will probably be a big focus come draft day next year, or draft days next year. So I think it depends on who. If Lewis is still here, I think it's Bodine. If he's gone, I'd say it's a free agent, or we might even sign a free agent. If Lewis leaves, who knows what'll happen?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of if the coaching staff stays intact. One guy, I don't know if I don't think you mentioned him. You mentioned JJ Dielman, Christian Westerman. I think that's a guy who might be a little interesting as well in terms of center capability. He is listed as a guard. He was a guard in college, but again, similar mold in terms of the upper body strength. A little bit he was actually known as a second or third round talent when the Bengals grabbed him in the 5th round, not this draft, but the one before. So he might be a guy they look at, especially maybe even in season, if the offensive line ends up being a total mess, including Bodine. So that's another guy who is currently on the roster that could be an option. And we have another question that's kind of related to this. I'll get to it in a second. Again, if the coaching staff ends up getting swept out the door, I think, like you said, Scott, I think there would be a complete overhaul of the offensive line. And I believe it was Rebecca Toback once again in the YouTube chat who said if Marvin Lewis goes, she believes that the rest of or a good majority of some of the coaching names we've already mentioned on the program will go, and I tend to agree with her on that. I think, if Marvin Lewis isn't here, I think then there's going to be a complete different change and a completely different look of the coaching staff next season. But let's hope the Bengals are successful, and that's not going to be a talking point after 2017. Kind of related to this, Michael Myers, another regular of the program. Good to see him here. How about Jake Fisher? He's played tight end and fullback, H-backish, yeah. And could he learn center if he's not tackle material? I think, personally speaking, I think athletically, Jake Fisher he was a tight end, I think, when Oregon recruited him, and he started there. Then they moved him to offensive line. So I think athletically he can do a lot of different things, and that was the plus side of why he was one of the top tackles or top offensive linemen in the draft in 2015. I think athletically he probably could do some things, But I think build, it's not a fit. I think at that point you're kind of fitting a square peg in a round hole. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I just looked up their heights. He's only an inch taller than Dealman, but several inches taller than your typical center. They have him listed on the website at 6'6". Fisher is 6'6". And it's very rare to see. I know the center that came out from LSU, that Posick, whatever his name was like 6'7", and he was dinged pretty hard for that on draft day. And part of the reason is, it's possible, but like you say, and there's a lot of leverage. You're going up against, these defensive tackles who are 6'1", 6'2", and it's not that it can't be done. It's just, it's a challenging thing. It's something he's probably never done, never practiced. They could probably teach it to him. I mean, get him to try to learn it. It's a question, how successful would he be, and how many years or months would it take until he got to a point where they felt confident enough that he could step in and do that. I think it'd be more likely, you mentioned Westerman, I think someone like him or someone like Trey Hopkins, who they seem to play everywhere on the line, might be a possibility. But I think as long as Alexander's there, it's Bodine or bust. So.
Yeah, and I see two schools of thought here where, if the offensive line just becomes a complete shambles this season, and you feel that Fisher, even though he may not be working out so great at right tackle, you still feel he's one of your 5 best linemen, and you want to get your 5 best linemen on the field. I understand the thinking of, well, he might, even though he's not great at right tackle, he might be better than Bodine, or we might as well see. I guess I understand that. I wouldn't understand that if the Bengals are in the middle of a playoff race, but if that's something that they think they want to tinker around with, okay. I don't think he has the build for center, and I would prefer a guy who actually has not only the build for it, but maybe some experience in playing the position, whether it's TJ Johnson, maybe Christian Westerman, maybe Trey Hopkins, as you said, who's kind of been a Swiss Army knife guy early on in mini camps and stuff. So I don't see Fisher being necessary. Go ahead.
I'd say one thing I think they could do if the offensive line does struggle a lot this year is what they've done with Fisher so far is just say, we need more than 5 offensive linemen. We're going to move him back to that jumbo, that 6th offensive lineman, and just say, hey, we've invested in guys like Eifert, A.J. Green, John Ross. We're just going to have one less receiver and figure you're going to have to take just as many defensive guys to cover them because hopefully they're that good. I mean, that's 2 top 10 picks on receivers and elite tight end. We're throwing those guys out there. We're just going to block with 6 linemen instead of 5. And I'm just hoping, so that's a possibility. They did it some last year and the year before because they wanted to get him out there, and the blocking wasn't always the best. And if it's even worse this year, it'd be interesting to see if they try something like that, a 6 offensive line package instead of the typical 5. I just hope if they do that, they don't think we're going to throw the ball to Jake Fisher and running the ball, because the last thing I want is him fumbling again and turning the ball over.
One interesting kind of formation I was just thinking about, to me, if Fisher isn't able to necessarily anchor the right tackle spot, it would seem to me that he might be more of an Eric Steinbach athletic left guard type. Now, obviously, the Bengals' most tenured and quite possibly the best offensive lineman they have on their unit right now is Clint Bowling, who takes up that spot. But, it would almost sound – if you go Cedric Abwehi left tackle, Jake Fisher left guard, maybe you kick Clint Bowling in to center, which is a position he did play in, I believe, limited snaps at Georgia. Then you figure out someone else at right guard. You kick Andre Smith out to right tackle, which is a position he played for years with the Bengals and which is what he's played his entire NFL career. Instead of right guard, which he currently has the inside track of the starting job to. Maybe then you bring in a Westerman, a Trey Hopkins, someone like that to play right guard, and you really reshuffle things. I don't know. Again, that's kind of barring the line being a complete disaster, which it doesn't look great this year, but we hope it's not. This coaching staff has been hesitant to make changes at times for starting positions in the season. And if they feel that they're on the cusp of another playoff berth or a very special season and the offensive line needs to be tinkered with, I hope that they are not hesitant to pull the trigger on some of that stuff. Scott, any additional thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, there was one question I wanted to answer on the YouTube chat, and I cannot remember who wrote it. There's a big list of comments and questions, so I'll just throw the question out if you remember who said it or if he wants to comment again and say who he was. But the question was whether Lewis will be back next year, and if not, who the top candidates would be to take his job. And one of the two answers I saw someone answered already. So I'll just copy that answer because that was one of the two I was going to give when I saw it. Was I think if he goes, I think it's probably internal. I think they have even if they say enough with Lewis, it's time to move on. I don't know if they would do a total overhaul or just say we're moving on from Lewis, we're going to move up. I think that the candidates who would get an interview and probably the leading candidates would be internal guys, which would be either Paul Alexander or Gunther. And even though Alexander has been the assistant head coach forever, I think it'd be Gunther. He's someone I think I'd prefer it to be. Even though your friend seems to think Alexander might be a great head coach or a great coach of some sort, and I think he could be, I think those two guys would definitely be on the interview list. And of those two, I would assume Gunther. But, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out as an answer.
No, I saw that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I agree with you in the fact that they would probably get looks, or that would be the way, because the Bengals have really done this in terms of coaching, a promotion from within type of thing. And if you work for a business or an organization for a long time, obviously you like to have opportunities for growth. I think any ambitious person does. As a Bengals fan, I would not like those hires. I think if it's Marvin Lewis's time to go, it's time to move outside. And interestingly enough, when Marvin Lewis took over, if you remember, it was after a lot of internal hires and or guys that had been around, that had experience either currently on the team or before. I mean, Bruce Coslett, Dick LeBeau, obviously David Shula was a newbie, but Lewis was taking over for guys that were kind of recycled within the organization, and obviously it's been a lot better product that he's put out on the field than his predecessors. So now you look at it, the same thing. Sam Weish was obviously another guy that was kind of recycled through the organization. Bill Walsh was a guy who was in the organization they passed on. So, I mean, it's a roll of the dice. One guy that just really keeps interesting me in terms of his demeanor, in terms of running a successful program, and this is if the Bengals want to do that weird leap into the college ranks, maybe grab the next Jim Harbaugh, Pete Carroll, that sort of thing. One guy that kind of keeps jumping out to me is Stanford's Brian Shaw. Just a guy I really respect. I think he's a guy that isn't the crazy madman that his predecessor Jim Harbaugh was, but still runs a tight ship, runs a very, very physical Stanford team, and has put out a number and has continued to carry the torch from a guy like Jim Harbaugh to make that team very competitive. And that would be a guy I would be interested in if the route is the college ranks. Obviously, there's a lot of other names out there that are, kind of recycled former NFL head coaches, and they come with their pluses and minuses. But I don't know. Just a couple of names there. I'm glad you caught that question. I did see that earlier. Again, way too early to kind of speculate because Marvin Lewis is the guy for at least this year. We'll see if he can get the team on a rebound. He's done it before. They have a lot of talent. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It's a big year, though, as we've mentioned from the get-go of this show. It's a big year for Marvin Lewis with the Cincinnati Bengals.